If you can't hear me, let me know. Also, if you have any questions, just shout them out. I can't really see your hands raised, so just interrupt me mid-sentence. And I'll also take questions at the end, but it's best if you ask your questions right when you think about them, because then the talk is more like a discussion instead of me talking at you, and then talks are better that way. So I'm going to talk about psilocybin mushrooms. This talk I made just last week, and what I was trying to do is take my hour-long talk and cut it down to 15 minutes. That did not work at all, but there's a lot less stuff in this talk, so it's way better. But what I'm going to show you really quick before I start about this is a little bit about the photography that I do. So I'm going to process a photo right now so you can see how this works. These are some Psilocybe subtropicalis photos that I took about 6 weeks ago in Veracruz, Mexico. I think this is one of the best subtropicalis photos that I have. And I'm doing something with the camera called photo stacking, where I take a whole lot of photos and combine them into one picture. And it takes a little bit of extra time, but it's totally worth it. And so I took all these pictures with this automatic feature of the camera that just takes a lot of pictures real fast and changes the focus a little bit each time. And then I load them into Adobe Bridge to look at them. And this will be the last photo in the stack. So if you look, you can see the very back of the mushrooms in focus, but the aperture is wide open, so the depth of field is super narrow. So what I have is a whole lot of slices of the final photo. So that will be the final slice, and then the beginning slice just has the front of the mushroom in focus, and that will be this one here. It's just like the front of the, not even the mushroom, but I like to have the dirt in front in focus. So I take all of those and I bring those into a program called Helicon. And what Helicon does is it combines all these pictures into one picture where everything is in perfect focus. So I just load those in and then hit go. And now you can see it constructing the image on the screen there.
Wow. Whoa. So cool. What?
This is called Helicon, so it's not Adobe, it's like a third-party program. But there's a free one called Combine ZP. And so now you can see that like the resolution in here is really good. You can zoom in, and I can get as much depth of field as I want. And super crisp. No, it's like a standalone program called Helicon Focus. But the free one is Combine ZP, but you can try Helicon because it has a free 30-day trial. And then Zurine Stacker is the other one a lot of people use. Photoshop can also do it, but it's not as good. This is the best picture that I've ever taken, so I'll see myself from college. But I also wanted to show you really quick the pictures that I took today during our foray. That was yesterday. So this is Trametes sanguinea, little red Trametes. And then here's a Mycena. This is Mycena melangina, a little tiny Mycena that grows on bark. And this one is Phlebopsis crassa. We got the black, I don't know why this black thing is showing up.
There.
But, yeah, Mycena melangina. The underside. Yeah, so this is all focus stacked. And you can tell it's focus stacked because there's a lot of depth of field, but then the background is super blurry because the aperture was wide open. Here is the Hemixomyces, so they're like little tiny tubes. And this is a little coprenoid. I put a piece of black velvet behind for this one. And this is the same thing when it grows up.
Wow.
And then here's our wood ears. That's one with the light coming from in front of it, and then I shine the light down through it. So I think that's all I have for those. So.
Cool. Do you know one thing is cool that I have noticed? Is a lot of the mushrooms, especially the close-ups and stuff, it reminds me so much of different
Yeah, especially in the malaria and stuff like that, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah. That's
So we'll talk about psilocybin mushrooms. Don't forget to interrupt me if you have any questions. This is a new species that I discovered in my mailbox this spring. So this came in the mail from Pennsylvania, and I actually discovered it in my mailbox twice at once because the same species came in the mail from Iowa. So there's not many psilocybins in Iowa. I think this is the only one. But two people sent me these mushrooms, and I sequenced the DNA, and it turned out that they both had the exact same DNA sequence, and it's totally different from any of our other mushrooms, and it's really close to Psilocybe asticorum. So it's a section asticorum. These fruit really late in the year, so they've just started fruiting, and they've been found in Indiana and Ohio, and they're kind of all over the place. So usually when people see them, they think that they found late season ovoids, but they are pretty different than Amaryllis now. And they look really cool on outer. So I took a gill fragment that I got in the mail and put it on a petri dish. And after 60 days, the petri dish looked like this. So you get these awesome blue rhizomorphs. So I decided I'm going to name it Psilocybe cerulean rhizome. And it's always good to name mushrooms after a unique feature that they have. Because in 10,000 years, if I name it after my friend, it won't have a meaning. This is another really cool one. This one grows in mountains of California. And when I sequenced it, it came out next to Psilocybe hopi. And so hopi is described from Arizona. And so these, they have this cap that never opens up. They just stay secretoid like that. But it's a wood lover that grows at really high elevation. And then another one is this one that I found in California. This one is Galeropsis polytrichoides, but Galeropsis doesn't exist anymore, so everything in Galeropsis is getting moved to other genera. And when I sequenced this one, it came out sister species to Psilocybe folliculosa. So I'm going to rename it Psilocybe polytrichoides.
Do you think there's any kind of like evolutionary disadvantage from them not like opening up their gills to disperse their spores?
I think it gets kind of dry in the mountains of California, and so it's an adaptation to deal with dry weather. Because mushrooms need like little drops of water or humidity to release the spores. So when it's really dry, they can't release their spores. So a lot of times the desert mushrooms have versions that don't open up. Like chlorophyllum milledieis is all over around here, but when you get into like Arizona, you have this other version that just stays like, it looks like a puffball. When you cut it open, you see the green gills.
So why put up a mushroom?
What's that?
So why even put up a mushroom? But do you think it's just like an environmental, like a local like environmental situation that causes them to not open, or is it like a different species?
It's a different species.
Yes, and then like why would they put the energy into putting up a mushroom?
I think the spores get distributed through rainfall and also maybe by animals or insects. So it still wants to put the spores out, but it just can't really have the gills that open up all the way up. And there's a lot of mushrooms that have versions like this, like agaricus has agaricus desert-picola, it's all over the desert. And the shaggy manes are all over the desert in the secretoid form.
So was that one bruised blue as well?
They're all bruised blue, but some a lot more than others. And the reason for that is because they have this enzyme that dephosphorylates the psilocin into this blue pigment. And sometimes some mushrooms have a lot of that enzyme, some mushrooms have just a little bit. So if you have a really strong staining blue mushroom, it's really potent, but a lot of really potent mushrooms don't stain too much. This is another new species that I discovered in my mailbox. This one came in the mail from Florida, and I'm going to call it Psilocybe niviotropicalis. It's closely related to Psilocybe ovoidiocystidiata, but it has a much whiter cap color. And that was discovered by Scott Ostuni, who lives in Florida. And then this one was discovered in the 1940s in Ainocybe insignis, but it was never known to contain psilocybin. But Evan Adkins noticed that it was staining blue, so he mailed me a little bit, and I tested it with this miraculous test kit. So this is a little reagent test, and it turns darker in color depending on how strong, how much psilocybin there is. So you can see this one's pretty strong, it's like almost 2%. And so this is the first psilocybin-containing Ainocybe from North America. There's like 6 of them that are known from Europe. So Ainocybe is really unique because it's ectomycorrhizal, so they need a tree to grow. You can't grow this indoors. And so these are the only ectomycorrhizal psilocybin mushrooms.
When you say 2%, you mean 2% by weight of the mushroom?
2% weight alkaloids by dry weight.
Okay, still low.
So it's pretty strong. This is what it looks like in the microscope. Inoxidase have this really awesome microscopic features. And really cool spores. And then this tuberia, I discovered it in my mailbox, and it came in the mail from Pennsylvania. And none of the tuberias have been known to stain blue or contain psilocybin, but this one did stain blue. So he sent it to me, and it came in at about 1%. And I sequenced this one too. It doesn't seem to be a known species. There's a lot of research on psilocybin. Yep.
How often are you surprised at things arriving in your mailbox? Every month?
Pretty often, yeah.
Yeah?
I haven't been home in 3 months because I've just been mushroom hunting, and now I have a big stack of mail. And stuff in there. Yeah, I get hundreds of collections of mushrooms in my mail. The cops don't seem to care.
Question, when they ship it, do they try to keep it, and do they keep it moist when they ship it?
No, they gotta dry it. Sometimes people mail me fresh stuff, and it's always really sad to open it up and see the moldy. Yeah, like, oh, sorry, I gotta tell you, you gotta dry it. So yeah, everything's always dry. So there's been a lot of research in psilocybin recently in the past couple of years, and a lot of really cool new papers have come out. This paper is coming out of this lab in Jena, Germany, and it turns out that most of the psilocybin research that's done in the world is done in this little town in Germany. I don't know why, but the guys there are really cool, and they do really good work. So this is where they discovered norpsilocin, which is another alkaloid, and it turns out there's a dozen different tryptamine alkaloids in psilocybin mushrooms. Another really cool discovery is Felix Bly, who's also in Jena, Germany, discovered that psilocybin mushrooms also contain beta-carbolines. And beta-carbolines are in the exoskeleton of scorpions, so that is what causes scorpions to fluoresce in ultraviolet light. But it also is in ayahuasca, and it's what causes the DMT in ayahuasca to be orally active. So they inhibit the MAO enzymes, and they make any drug that you take much stronger. So maybe the beta-carbolines also affect the trip somehow. This is pure psilocybin crystals, and psilocybin is pretty hard to extract, but my friend Felix Bly grew a whole bunch of Psilocybe cubensis, and then ran it through a process called preparative HPLC, which is a kind of chromatography, so it separates all the molecules by how polar they are, and he was able to get pure psilocybin crystals to grow. Really quick, I'll talk about the different psilocybin mushrooms that we have in Texas. This one is Pluteus, photo by Jacob Polk. It's not a very good picture, but it's the only picture we have of it. But it's a blue staining Pluteus, and this one was found in San Antonio. I think it's San Antonio. Yeah. It's Harburgo Park in San Antonio. So these Pluteus are really interesting because they have pink spores. You kind of see the gills turn pink when it matures. So most psilocybin mushrooms have purple spores or black spores. So this is something super rare, and if you find it, it's way too valuable to eat. But this one hasn't been studied yet, so I don't know which species it is. It's probably a new species. But there's a lot to discover in Texas as well. A really common one in Texas is Paneolus cyanescens. And this is a photo that I took in Jalisco a couple months ago, but the same thing grows in Texas. And so these are about 3 times as strong as Psilocybe cubensis, so very strong mushrooms. And you notice that they have black gills because they have jet black spores. And then the gills have this mottled appearance because the spores are maturing at different rates. So they get that kind of speckled look on them. And these grow directly from cow manure in the more tropical areas of Texas. So I don't think they grow right here, but if you drive just like a few miles southeast, you'll start to see them. Basically, the closer you get to Houston, the more you see. Here's my tackle box. When I collect mushrooms, I always like to put them in the box so they can stay separated and they don't get crushed. But also, when you collect psilocybin mushrooms, you should collect every mushroom you see. Because psilocybin mushrooms are still illegal, they really shouldn't be, hopefully that will change soon. But if you collect a whole lot of mushrooms, you're much less likely to get busted than if you just have one kind of mushroom. Because if you just have like one bag of mushrooms, the cops search you, they're going to throw you in jail. But if you have 800 bags of mushrooms and the cops search you, they're going to be like, what the hell are you doing? And they'll be really confused, and then you can tell them a long story about mushrooms. And,
Use a lot of science words and
yeah.
it'll be fine.
And so, like, you know, when the cops bust people, they send the suspected drug sample to the crime lab, and it's kind of a lot of work at the crime lab. The crime labs are way backed up, so they can't send like hundreds of samples to the crime lab and hope that one of them is gonna be psychoactive.
So they'll just let you go?
In my experience, they have. Also, the drug laws are unique in that intent is an element of the offense. So with most laws, ignorance is no excuse, but with drug laws, ignorance is an excuse, which means you're not guilty of drug possession unless you intended to possess the drugs. So that's why the mailman is not guilty if they delivered some like mushrooms to your house. But also, if you just collect a lot of mushrooms and you don't know what they all are, if you happen to pick a psilocybin mushroom, technically you shouldn't be found guilty. You probably wouldn't still be anyway, you have to appeal.
I just found out, I was picking it to send it to you, so I know what it is.
But in any case, it's definitely a really good idea to pick all the mushrooms you see, and then you can like wave some amanitas in his face and just like show him some polypores and stuff like that, and they probably won't even notice little loose day mushrooms. Pineal sinus is also really good one to cultivate because it's really strong. It doesn't really hurt people's stomach as much as Psilocybin cubensis does. So this is a photo I took in my friend's closet in Maryland. Another really common one in Texas is Pineal cinculus, and this grows both in lawns and in manure. Usually horse manure, occasionally cow manure. So sometimes you'll find stable shavings, and they'll be like where they pile up all of the horse manure from the stable, and there will be hundreds of thousands of these mushrooms fruiting out the whole length of the stable shavings. But the lawns are the other habitat you find it, so usually it's very well-watered lawns, and those tend to be very green. So the greener the better, and then you'll find exactly the same species growing there as well. Like the other pineals, they have jet black spores. And they also have the mottled texture on the gills. Another one you find in Texas is Gymnopilus luteofolius. And so this is interesting because it's got bright orange spores. It's one of the most beautiful psilocybin mushrooms because the cap starts out this lavender color, almost fuchsia, and then fades to yellow as it matures. So it has really good colors. They're super bitter and they're not very strong, but sometimes they're really prolific and there can be thousands of them coming up out of piles of wood chips. And occasionally I find them in the forest growing on trees. The most commonly picked mushroom in Texas is Psilocybin cubensis. And Psilocybin cubensis was discovered in 1906 in Cuba. Although it's not native to there, it grows on dung, and it grows on dung of animals that were brought over here from Europe and Asia. So this is native to Asia, and it came over probably hundreds of years ago, and it's an invasive species that's doing really well. And so, it's not in the whole state of Texas. The dividing line where it grows and does not grow is right around Austin. It almost reaches to here, and maybe like once in a decade you would find it around here, but if you just drive a little bit to the east where it's more humid, then it starts to get really common.
Hey, Alan, I got a question.
Yeah.
So, for some people here don't know, the epithet, the last part of cubensis, iensis, means that it's from a specific region, right? And so that means that this is from Cuba, but it is found worldwide. So why would it be called cubensis if it's found in India?
Yeah, and the person who discovered it named it just didn't know that it occurred in other places because he was doing his work in Cuba.
But I mean, like, since they update taxonomy all the time, why wouldn't they update this name?
Because the first name that gets published is the valid name forever. So
Like a prologue.
So that's why you should pick a good name for stuff. Usually I don't like to name things after places because you always find it somewhere else. But yeah, he's the first person to publish this species. He published it as Stropharia cubensis. So then in the 1940s, they discovered it was psilocybe, so they renamed it to Psilocybe cubensis. But since cubensis was the first species epithet to get published, that can never be updated. It's just always going to be cubensis.
I have a question. Do the wild ones have a strain name, or are they just all?
No, wild ones don't have a strain name, although they're all different. Sort of like, basically every time you pick a mushroom from the wild, it is a different strain. And so when I picked them from the wild, I just named them the strain name of like the city, the nearest city to where I found them. So it kind of has a little bit of meaning. And there's a lot of different strains of cubensis. This particular one is called Enigma. And somebody handed me this a couple months ago when I was staying at my friend's house in Guadalajara. And so you can see it was staining blue really strongly. And so these never make mushrooms. They just make this kind of brain-like fold. And they're extremely potent. And so I cooked some up. And served it to a bunch of people, and they really liked it. It's delicious when you cook it, and it retains all of its psychoactive benefits.
And it actually tastes good.
Oh, they're so good. Yeah, they would definitely be in the supermarkets if they weren't illegal. I've actually cooked a lot of different species of psilocybe, and they're all really delicious when you cook them up.
Did he eat all those?
What's that?
Did he eat all those? That guy?
They're still really strong, so nobody had very many.
Oh, okay.
Those are species that grow in dung and bush manure just to sterilize it?
You certainly could, or you could put them and throw them in boiling water and make tea.
Okay.
That's usually what people do. But yeah, cooking them, I think you get less stomach pain because like raw mushrooms, they kind of hurt your stomach a little bit, or dried mushrooms. So I think cooking them is a pretty good idea. But when you cook dried mushrooms, they're not particularly delicious. It's really the fresh mushrooms that I think are best to cook. And I just kind of saute them in oil until they're golden brown on all sides, and add a little bit of salt, pepper. Another one that's turned up in Texas, I think only twice, is Psilocybe caerulescens. So this one was discovered in 1923 in Montgomery, Alabama. And then they found it all over Mexico in the 1950s. So it's really common in southern Mexico, and that's why I took this photo. But when Paul Stamets found it in 1996 in Georgia, he thought he discovered a new species, so he named it after his friend Andrew Weil. And it had that name for a while, Psilocybe wiley. But it turns out that Psilocybe caerulescens and Psilocybe wiley are not different at all. So Psilocybe caerulescens was published first, so that's the official name. And then I saw Andrew Weil at a mushroom conference, and I told him that he no longer had a mushroom named after him. And he ran out of the room and called Paul Stamets and was like, what's the deal with this? And Paul told him, I don't know, man.
I have a question. Do you think the range of those is expanding because of landscaping and the use of certain mulches coming from the regions where it's native?
It's really hard to tell if the ranges are expanding because there's so many more people that are looking for mushrooms and putting their finds on the internet that we're seeing them in more and more places. But it's really hard to know if they were there a long time ago. These were found in Dallas in November 16th, 2017. So it's about to be Psilocybe caerulescens season in Dallas. And they're pretty rare this far west, but it's still something you should be looking for. They're pretty big mushrooms that like to grow in kind of decaying wood.
I remember when that was posted, and I still haven't seen anything since that.
Yeah.
That's caerulescens?
Yeah, that's caerulescens. And then I think it was also seen in Big Thicket.
Really?
Yeah. Like David Lewis.
So hopefully it's a little bit more invasive this wood.
So now I'll just quickly go through the rest of the psilocybin mushrooms that we see in North America. This one, Psilocybe azurescens, used to be the strongest wild psilocybin mushroom with 2% alkaloid content, But recently, some Psilocybe zapticorum that I found in Mexico got tested at 3%. So these are still extremely strong. And so, these are kind of interesting. They only grow in the mouth of the Columbia River. So there's a very tiny native habitat. But they're really tall mushrooms. They can be like 6 or 8 inches tall.
Could you talk about wood lovers paralysis?
And so if you eat these, you'll see a lot of colors, and they're extremely strong, but you might not be able to move for a while. And that's not the effect of psilocybin. That's called wood lovers paralysis. And it's pretty rare. It's never happened to me. It doesn't happen to most people, but people who have eaten a lot of these, it sometimes happens to them, and they just can't move for like a few hours. Yeah, then you're fine. So it's a little disconcerting because people like are awake, but they can't really move their legs.
It's called calcium.
It hasn't yet, but perhaps. But people, generally eat, medium, or sometimes people eat really large doses of psilocybin mushrooms, and it seems like nobody's ever been able to die from them. The amount is like really big, so that they're not particularly.
We're working on it, I guess.
That's right.
So these Psilocybe ajurescens have a coordinate partial veil. And then another one is Psilocybe alinei, and this grows all the way up and down the west coast in woodchip landscaping. And it has these hemispherical caps. It stains blue really strongly, and it's very potent. And so when I find stuff like this, I take all of the caps, cut the stems off, put them on tin foil, and let them sit overnight. And then in the morning, you have all these spore prints. And the spore prints are really cool. What I do with them is put them into brand new Ziploc bags, which are sterile, and then you can throw them on auger to fire aquaculture, or you can drop them in the mail around the world, or you can scrape up a little bit of the spores and use them for microscopy. And it turns out that spore prints are the best way to do microscopy of spores, because when you put a gill on the microscope slide to look at the spores, you have a little bit of gill tissue that's pushing up the cover slips, and the spores don't sit quite flat. And also, the spores on the gills are not all fully mature. So if you have a spore print, then the spores all sit in the same focal plane, so you get a really nice spore photo, and you can be guaranteed that all of the spores are fully mature. Another really potent one is Psilocybe cyanescens. This also grows all along the west coast. And recently it's turned up on the east coast a little bit too. Turned up in Pennsylvania just today. It's been found in Pennsylvania a few times now. Sigrid found some in New York and sequenced it and matched the west coast stuff perfectly. So I don't know if that's from people mailing spore prints around or if it's always been there, but they're around, and they really like cold weather, so they tend to fruit when the temperatures drop. If you have a rainy fall or rainy winter, you get a lot of these. Another really cool one that grows on the west coast is Psilocybe folliculosa. This is a photo I took last year in Seattle. And so these are called the common psilocybin, and sometimes there's thousands of them or tens of thousands of them. They look a lot like Galerina and Mycena, but they have purple spores and they stain blue. And then recently I found some psilocybin in Arizona this August, and I sequenced the DNA, and it matched this DNA sequence of these mushrooms here 100%. So it turns out that Psilocybin folliculosa also turns up in Arizona.
How long does it take one of these to go from a spore to a mushroom?
Cubensis is like the fastest. There's about, but basically a 2 or 3 month growing cycle for Cubensis. The other species are usually more like 5, 6 month growing cycles. In nature, it's usually a year or 2. Kind of depends on the conditions. It's a lot less time if they stay wet all year, because the mycelium can colonize all year. If it kind of dries out and goes dormant, it'll take longer.
Do you think the USPS has a lot to do with these like showing up in different places? Because I can imagine people not going to throw them in the trash even if they're not going to use them.
It's hard to tell because people grow these exotic psilocybe species all over the place, even in outdoor beds, and they rarely take hold. But sometimes invasive species do take hold. I don't know what causes them to take hold or not take hold. But yeah, people put like outdoor beds of all sorts of species all over the place, and they'll fruit for a year or two, and then they won't see them fruit anymore, and they're not really, they don't escape into nature very easily, even though the spores blow everywhere. But it has to be a not insignificant one. Here's Psilocybe semilanceata. These are known as liberty caps, and these don't stain blue at all, hardly. If you have a pile of 100 of them, they'll stain blue. You'll see blue on 1 or 2 of them. But for the most part, you don't see much blue stain. But they're really potent. And they grow on the west coast, but only in grass. This one's pretty rare. It grows only in Washington and British Columbia. And so Psilocybe biocystis has this cool undulating cap margin. I think it turned up in New Jersey the other day too. And then Psilocybe sanitifilosa, also super rare, also from Washington. Psilocybe stuntsii is one that they call blue ringer. It's kind of cool because it has this ring on the stem, and the ring often stains blue, so it's got this bright blue ring on the stem. It's not closely related to Psilocybe cubensis. This is like so closely related to liberty caps. So people, the mycologists from years past, they thought that because they had the ring in the stem, they'd be closely related to cubensis. But it turns out that's not true. But Psilocybe ovoidiocystidiata is very closely related to cubensis. This one was discovered in Pennsylvania, and it's spread all throughout the east, so all over West Virginia, New York, and Ohio, and it's very common in a lot of those kind of places where they find it in floodplains. But the guy who discovered it was Richard Gaines, who discovered it in 2004, and he brought some mycelium back west and he planted it all along the west coast, and now you can find it along the west coast as well, in wood chips, although nobody knows if it was there before he did that or not.
What color are the spores on that?
Everything in Psilocybe has dark purple-brown spores.
Thank you.
And so Psilocybe ovoidiocystidiata has this tongue-twisting species epithet because of the ovoid cystidia. So here is the ovoid-shaped cystidia that's found on the gills. So you can see here's the spores over here. Cystidia is a little bit bigger. And here's what it looks like on agar. And this agar, I used charcoal agar to give it a black background. Here's Psilocybe mescaleroensis. This was discovered in New Mexico at very high elevation. This is the habitat where I found Psilocybe mescaleroensis.
What county in New Mexico?
Lincoln.
Lincoln.
What does that epithet come from?
Mescalero is a city in Lincoln County. However, Mescalero is kind of like a lower elevation area, so the person who discovered this didn't want people to find them, and so he kind of like named it after this other city that was a little bit further away. I think they named it after like the Mescalero Reservation, or the Mescalero.
It's an Apache.
Yeah. Yeah, but it doesn't really grow in the Mescalero Reservation. It grows in very high elevation in the National Forest. And then here's Psilocybe hopii. This was discovered in the hills above Flagstaff, Arizona. That's the only place this one grows. It's closely related to Psilocybe cyanescens, and it's super rare. It's only been found 2 or 3 times. And then here's Psilocybe aztecorum. This one was described from the volcanoes that surround Mexico City. And so it can be really common there. So you go up to the tops of these volcanoes in September, and it can be like the most common mushroom. You can easily find 10,000 of them in a day. And then they turned up in Colorado recently. So in Mexico, they grow at about 10,000 feet elevation because they like it really cold. And then in Colorado, they grow about 7,000 feet elevation. And then in Canada, they grow at sea level. And when they found them in Canada, they named them Psilocybe cubensis because they discovered it around there, but it turned out it's the same thing.
So do these mushrooms use the psilocybin as a deterrent to not be eaten?
No one knows what psilocybin is for, but one thing that we can tell is that psilocybin is a storage mechanism, and so it's very stable because it has the phosphorus atom. And then whenever you bruise a psilocybin mushroom, that psilocybin is instantly dephosphorylated by these enzymes into psilocin. And so the psilocybin is like the storage mechanism to store psilocin, and then the psilocin very quickly is polymerized into this blue polymer. And so that seems to be on purpose, and it's probably some kind of defense mechanism. Maybe that blue polymer is what they're really trying to make. Maybe it pisses off bugs or insects or interferes with digestion. Nobody really knows, and it's basically for every chemical that's in a mushroom, no matter what chemical it is, nobody knows why it's there, with very few exceptions. So it's very hard to ask mushrooms why they make something. Sometimes you can figure it out, but not usually.
Animals and slugs and stuff seem to eat them like freely, so do they not respond the same as people?
I think slugs do not respond the same as people. The slugs seem to eat them okay, but certainly like mammals that eat them are affected. Here's Psilocybe cerulipes. This one grows on beechwood out east. I think this photo is from New York. I found it in Mexico a couple times, but the beech forests are super rare in Mexico, so there's only a couple spots in Mexico this one grows. But this one also fruits really late in the season, so it's peak Psilocybe cerulipes season in New York and West Virginia right now. And here's Psilocybe campanensis. This was discovered right by Tampa, named after Tampa. It was discovered by Gary Linkoff and this guy, what's his name? Stephen Pollack. And they were at some medicinal mushroom conference, and they decided it was kind of boring, and so they went out to smoke a joint. They dropped the joint, and landed right by these blue snake mushrooms.
It's a sign!
So these aren't coprophytic, they don't grow on dung?
No, they're grasshoppers. So they thought they were super rare for a long time. It turns out they're actually pretty common in Georgia. When they found them in Georgia, they named them Psilocybe atlantis. But atlantis is just another synonym. And then it turned out in South Carolina last year as well. So these grow sclerotia. There's only a couple species of Psilocybe that do. And these sclerotia are these little nuggets. So these are some of the easiest psilocybin containing fungi to produce, because you don't need to fruit them, you don't need a fruiting chamber, you just inoculate some grain and let it sit around for a few months, and then you empty the grain out, and it has these nodules in it, and those contain psilocybin. So these are some sclerotia that are on display at the San Diego Fungus Fair. Another one that's all over the east, and I'm not sure if it goes quite this far south or not, I suspect it does, Gymnopilus subspectabilis. And so this one grows in really dense clusters. It's not very potent, but there can be hundreds or thousands of them, so they make up for that, just how many there are. And then another very similar one is Gymnopilus luteus. This one also has psilocybin stains blue. It's really big, but it doesn't grow in dense clusters, it grows in smaller groups. And it has this enlarged stem base here. And then Psilocybe youngensis is found in southern Mexico. And this is one that grows from logs, so it's one of the few that grow directly from wood in Mexico. And then Psilocybe hemii grows only in the cloud forests in southeastern Mexico. Kind of unique because it has these almost orange gills when it's young before they turn purple from the maturing spores.
They look almost like mycene.
Yeah, and they're super rare. Psilocybe hutchigenii is endemic to Oaxaca, and it took me about 10 years to find this mushroom, switching landslides, but they found it a couple years ago and got a DNA sequence. It turns out it's really close to Psilocybe mexicana, which was a big surprise. And then the rarest psilocybin mushroom in North America is Psilocybe radianalis. And it's only been found once in 2007. And so I went to the place they discovered it, and I couldn't find it. So I went to the herbarium in Jalapa, and that's where they deposited the holotype. And so these are the only specimens of Psilocybe mescalorensis that have ever been found. And when you name a new species, you deposit an example in the herbarium to be the official record for that species, and so that's the holotype of the radianalis. And so it's in this box, and I opened up the box, and they have these cool notes in there. And one of the nice things that they wrote in the notes is the GPS location. Whoa. Where they found it. And so I went out there.
Did Gaston Guzman make that deposit?
Well, he's not the person who discovered it. It was discovered by this Sanchez Jacome guy, and it was identified and published by Guzman and Florencia Ramirez. So yeah, he described it like most of the psilocybin. So basically somebody sent it to him. So that's the spot that it was discovered. And I went there, and then we're not there, but I just have to go back when the rains are really good. Here's Psilocybin mexicana. These are really potent, but don't stain blue very much. They grow in grass all over southern Mexico and North and Central America. And then the high elevation landslide mushroom is Psilocybin meliricula. So this one grows at the tops of the volcanoes in landslides. And here is Psilocybin neohalepensis. It's a picture I took about a month ago in Veracruz. It only grows in southeastern Mexico in the cloud forests. These are interesting because they don't grow near human disturbance. Most of the Psilocybin will grow like in farms or in wood chips or places where people kind of messed up the environment. But these grow way out in the forest, very far from where anybody has been. And they also are interesting because they smell like oil paint. So all psilocybin smell like cucumber, but then some psilocybin have some additional odors in addition to the cucumber. So this one smells like oil paint and cucumber. And the picture I took in the rain. Another one that's really cool is Psilocybin subtropicalis. So this one is really cool in ultraviolet light. And so I mentioned that psilocybins have beta-carbolines, which are super fluorescent. So the beta-carbolines you can see here. And Psilocybin zapticorum is very closely related to Psilocybin subtropicalis. And this is a very cool mushroom. It's really big. It can get up to like almost a foot tall. And they have this really cool scaly stem. They grow in landslides. And they stain blue really strongly. So here's a cat that I pinched and it turned cobalt blue within just a few seconds. And so they grow all over southern Mexico, and they're extremely potent. In fact, this is the most potent psilocybin mushroom known, since it's tested at 3% alkaloids. Another, this one is pretty rare. It only grows right along the Canadian border. And this is a foliotina, so it has these orange spores, kind of a white stem, blue at the base. And then Pluteus americanus, this is a photo taken in Chicago. So this one has pink spores, free gill attachment, doesn't look much like the other psilocybin mushrooms, but it stains blue. And I think this is the last one I'm going to show you. This one's Paneolus fimicola. So this is one of those grass-living Paneolus. And these have jet black spores, and they look very similar to Paneolus phonisecii, which doesn't have psilocybin, but that has very dark brown spores. These are pretty common in North Carolina and Georgia, so they probably turn up in Texas as well. They're probably misidentified as Paneolus cincellus. But Paneolus cincellus will have a red stem. And that is all I have for you.